In our previous video, we talked about entering data on the commercial income worksheet. The next tab after commercial income is called Lease Rollover Assumptions, nicknamed LRA. And it's a feature that's new to REIA Pro version 18. Well, what are LRAs? They're a set of assumptions about how tenant spaces are leased. How often the leases turn over? How many months of vacancy can you expect between leases? What's the probability of a tenant staying or leaving? And what change of terms might you expect at these transitions? Using the LRA feature of the program is entirely optional. So if the commercial income worksheet that you saw in an earlier video is working well for you on its own, that's fine. You may not need or want to use LRAs. But the beauty of the LRA is that you can create a set of assumptions once and then apply it to as many tenants on the commercial sheet as you like. You can use it to configure a standardized plan for multiple turnovers in the course of a 20-year analysis. In other words, it can be a huge time saver when it comes to data entry. Okay, so how do we use this? First, go to the Lease Rollover Assumptions worksheet, which is found just to the right of the commercial income. You click the Create button to add a blank set of assumptions for one LRA. You'll see that this assumption set comprises 42 rows. Just a side note, so that we don't waste time having you watch me type, I'm going to use as an example an LRA that I created earlier. Okay, you begin by entering data in the first row. Give your assumption set a name in the LRA category field. You could call it Prime Retail, or Medical Office, or whatever suits your purpose. Enter the term of the lease in years. For this, you would enter a typical term such as 5 or 10 years. If you entered 5, then the LRA would be creating 4 back-to-back lease terms with 3 rollovers or renewals during our 20-year analysis. Next is the rent unit of measure. This drop-down carries 2 options. So you click to select either dollars per square foot per year or dollars per square foot per month. Enter the probability of renewal expressed as a percentage. Okay, let's hold up here a minute to discuss this. What you're entering here is what you believe to be the likelihood that the tenant will, in fact, renew a lease, and you're expressing that likelihood as a percentage. The value can be anything from 0% to 100%. 0% means you believe the current tenant will never renew, and you'll always have a new tenant at rollover. 50% means that there is an equal likelihood that a tenant will either renew or leave. 100% means you're confident that the tenant will always renew, at least throughout the time frame of the analysis. And of course, you could choose any probability between 0 and 100% that you feel is appropriate. The last item in this row is the number of months you believe the space will be vacant during the rollover period, in a case where the current tenant will not be renewing. Next, you're going to see 2 blocks of 4 rows each. These represent 2 cases to consider, depending upon whether the tenant is renewing the lease or not. You'll enter the estimated market rent, abatements, tenant improvements, and commissions for each of these cases separately. For estimated market rent, the value for the first year is expressed in dollars per square foot per year or dollars per square foot per month as you chose in the first row. For the second and subsequent years, a value greater than 1 is treated as a dollar amount. Dollars per square foot per year, dollars per square foot per month. But a value of 1 or less is treated as a percent increase over the previous year. So 0.02 would mean a 2% increase. As you've seen on other worksheets, the values you enter in the first year will copy automatically across the rows. You may want to change these values at some point in the timeline, so also as on other worksheets in the program, you can overwrite the purple cells. Once again, you do that by entering a dollar amount, or alternatively, a simple percentage like 0.03 to show a 3% increase. You should note that values for market rent, abatements, tenant improvements, and commissions apply only to the beginning of each lease period. Finally, you need to let the program know how to increase the rent during a lease. The lease rate begins at the amount you set in the estimated market rent rows above. You can increase the rent by a dollar amount or percentage, as well as dictate the frequency of this increase. The frequency of rent increases must be a whole number of years. If you leave this as 0, there will be no increases. The remainder of the block for this category shows calculated values. You can go to the knowledge base under the support menu on our website, RealData.com, to find a detailed discussion of how these values are calculated by the software. If you need to remove one of these LRAs, you can use the Delete button to delete a category that is no longer in use. The system, however, will reject your request if some unit on the commercial income worksheet is in fact still using that category, still has that category selected. So, speaking of selecting, your final step is going to be to apply this set of lease rollover assumptions to a particular unit, or even to several units, on the commercial income worksheet. Let's go back to that worksheet now. We'll look at the first lease block as an example. Note that there is a drop-down in the top row of the lease block at cell Q11. Here is where you can choose to apply a set of lease rollover assumptions to this lease block. If you've created more than one LRA, you can choose the one that you want to apply to this particular unit. An important word of caution: a window is going to pop up to warn you that the LRA assumptions you're choosing will overwrite your data entry for this particular lease here on the commercial income sheet. You cannot reverse this change. Once you've applied the LRA to the lease here, most of the data entry cells automatically switch to a black color, which means they are now locked calculated values. Just a few remain for your adjustment. And one final note: an LRA can be applied only to this commercial income worksheet and not to any other sheet like basic income or quick commercial income. Okay, that wraps up our discussion of the lease rollover assumption feature. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's entirely optional, but it's a very powerful tool to help you model your forecasting of revenue from commercial units. Join me next time as I continue my discussion of how to use RealData's Real Estate Investment Analysis Pro Edition.